Welcome to another episode in our SWCD Spring Podcast Series. My name is Franny Jurdy. I'm with the Sherburne Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm the urban conservationist, and we are celebrating Pollinator Week. So we are very excited to talk to you all about how you can add pollinator habitat to your home landscaping. And I'm joined today by Quincy Sadowski with the U of M Extension and fellow coworker David Wick with the Sherburne SWCD. So first, I'm going to let both you and Quincy and David introduce themselves, just give a little brief intro, and then we'll get started. So Quincy, I might have you go first.
Sure. I'm Quincy Sadowski. I am the local horticulturist for 4 counties nearby. So I've got Stearns, Benton, Morrison, and Sherburne counties. Part of my role is providing general public information on their horticulture of yard and garden, but I also have part of my role coordinating the Master Gardener group. So if you hear about the Sherburne County Master Gardener group, they're a good group.
David?
My name is David Wick, and I'm a resource conservationist here at the SWCD, and I primarily work with landowners on tree and shrub health related concerns, and then I also assist with wetland restoration questions and projects.
Great. So Quincy, I kind of wanted to start with what folks might have in their landscape right now. So is there like a top 5 list of plants that people seem to gravitate towards the most?
You know, I have a lot of people call me and then we'll have a discussion whether that is that they're wanting to plant something new, or I have a lot of pest and disease questions. And I can probably categorize it into about 5 plants-ish. So the first one being arborvitae. So there's a ton of people that use that as windbreaks or as a sort of property line. Lots of folks talking about that and the different cultivars that it comes in. The next one would probably be lilac, especially last year with how it was reblooming when it wasn't supposed to. So lots of questions about that, and we had, of course, lilac leaf spot. So lots of people talking about that one. Again, used in property lines and windbreaks as well. Another one probably would be hydrangeas. As another foundational shrub that people use. Then the next couple ones I had to think and try to figure out what I would say to this question. So I think hostas and daylilies are probably one of the more common ones, especially in new construction out there. I feel like a lot of landscape designers, because they're easy and more low maintenance, that I think people usually put that as a foundational planting. And then my last one was probably maples. And I don't know if you were looking for more on the herbaceous side or shrubs or trees, but I have a ton of questions about specific maple cultivars or species. And I think this one is more of a historical trend too. So if we've looked back in years past, we've seen kind of this wave of planting based on what disease has gone through. So we saw with the chestnut, what did people replace with chestnut? We saw elms being planted, and then what happened to elms? What did people replace with elms? Ash trees. And now with emerald ash borer, I've been seeing a ton of people because they want something fast growing or having that color in the fall. A lot of people are choosing maples, which is fine. I think there are, we do have native maples, but the caveat being diversity and just being aware that if that's all we're replanting with right now, we don't know what the next wave could potentially be, and we just want to be prepared for that. So I think that would be my top 5.
Yeah.
5
Yeah,
and a half.
I was definitely thinking, okay, like hostas have to be in there, daylilies or something. I see those
Yep.
everywhere. Or what are they? The spirea shrubs.
Yep,
I feel like
those
those
two.
are used a ton. And so you kind of mentioned that, a lot of those are used because they're low maintenance, pretty easy to take care of. Is that kind of the main reason that it seems like folks are planting the same, handful of plants when there's a really, wide variety of options to choose from?
Yeah, I think so. As I was thinking about this question, I think it goes to the chicken or the egg
Mm-hmm.
question of what came first. So, did the
Yeah.
supply come first,
Mm-hmm.
or is it that folks tend to know a handful of plants, and
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they know, that
Yeah.
they can go to the nursery and say, well, I know what lilacs are, I know
Mm-hmm.
that I like them, and so
Mm-hmm.
that they gravitate towards those? Or is it because that was what was readily available for an extended period of time, and
Right.
now the greenhouse industry is like getting bigger and different, trying to diversify,
Mm-hmm.
and people are looking for different things? I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it maybe too is when you moved into a new house, that's what was there
Yep.
with some of that foundational planting, and so that's what people are
Yep.
aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a new development that went in right by my house, and I think every single house had a brand new autumn blaze maple right in the front.
Great. Great. Autumn blaze. I had a coworker
Yeah.
that was his least favorite tree.
I think David would agree with that one.
Yep.
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 See
Having
I
more
would have too.
problems than positives.
those need so much like structural pruning that I think landowners aren't aware of, and it can cause a lot of
Fast
problems in the
growing
future.
means more maintenance, and people
Yes.
don't think about that, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think.
Yep. So yeah, if any of you listening have an autumn blaze maple and want to know what to do, call David.
Call David. Don't call me.
So, like, this podcast is about pollinators, and
hmm
most folks landscaping are on like the cultivar side. Are there any pollinator benefits to kind of the main cultivars that people typically utilize that we can kind of give credit for?
Yeah, I think so. When I do have a presentation that I talk about popular plants and their native alternatives. I always want to preface that not all ornamental plants are bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
do have some benefit to
Yeah.
the ecosystem. Now, it's just when you look at it overall, does the cost and benefits measure out? So,
Mm-hmm.
like plants like sedum aren't necessarily native here in Minnesota, but pollinators love them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it gets some of those plantings extend into a longer growing period, so that grows
Sure.
into the fall. And sedum is one of those that grows a little bit later, blooms in a little bit later. Lilacs and hydrangeas still are providing pollen and nectar to our pollinators.
Mm-hmm.
It just, when we're looking at the whole plant, sometimes not every part of the plant is utilized, right? So some of our pollinators may not recognize it as a food
Mm-hmm.
source in their larva stage, and
Mm-hmm.
so they might not partake of that. Um, I think, was it Doug Ptolemy?
I have that
Oz.
book right in front of me,
Yeah, I don't
Bringing
know if
Nature
it's,
Home.
yep, I don't know if it's that his quote that is, if there isn't a hole in one of the leaves, or like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't look like it's being fed on, it's not where it's supposed to be, or something
Right.
to that
Yes.
fact.
A little bit of herbivory is okay.
Yes, and we want that because that means it's being utilized, right?
Yes.
Now,
Yep.
if it goes to the extreme and you're having like the pest ends of things, then
Yes.
there are issues too. But
Mm-hmm.
we want the plant to be benefiting the whole ecosystem.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that kind of goes into my next question about why is it important to plant native versus like cultivars or plants that are from Europe or Asia or something,
hmm
because they're providing those ecological services and providing for pollinators. Because yeah, like you said, a plant from Europe or Asia might look really nice in our yard and might do well here, but pollinators that evolved in North America might not recognize that as something that they can utilize. And especially because you mentioned maples, and I know Norway maple, I think, is probably the most planted landscape tree, and it does not get utilized like our native maples. And having the book in front of me, I have it open to the page where it says what trees support, and maples can support 285 different species of Lepidoptera. So those are moths and butterflies. So their caterpillars feed on the leaves. So native maples can support that many species, but not non-native.
And I think in that book he says, that's one of my favorite fun facts, is what species can you plant that would be utilized the most by pollinators or something, and it's the oak tree.
Yes, that's the top 534.
Yep.
And there's not that many species of Lepidoptera in Minnesota, but that's North America. But there's still probably at least 100 or more in Minnesota. But
yeah, I think I have that number somewhere tucked away too, and I don't know it off the top of my head.
Right. So for if someone, is either wanting to design a new garden, or maybe they just want to revamp their existing garden, what are some good alternatives to some of those common landscape plants? Like if they needed to take out a daylily or a hosta or something, are there any good native plants that really fit that niche well?
Yeah, I can certainly, there's a lot more alternatives in the shrub and tree side of things, the woody perennials. Herbaceous, it's hard to fit exactly the same niche or have the look exactly the same. And a lot of times they might not have the same growing time as some of the ornamental plants. So like hostas are around all season. If you wanted to compare it to like a skunk cabbage, they're very in the spring. And so they aren't around the whole growing season. So you couldn't necessarily replace it exactly, right? You just can't. But some examples, the nice thing with arborvitae is that actually white cedar and red cedar in some areas is native. It's where we get into a lot of the cultivars or the specific breeding for them to have that certain shape or stay on the mini side, that there is that. If it's still a native, but now it's a cultivar of a native, which we have some of that, like the different colored cone flowers that are out there, does it still benefit pollinators in its native, comparing it to its native traits? And there's some research that like if you start messing with some of it, it might be that I saw one research that they changed, I think it was a hyssop variety, and they found that the larva stage of one of the pollinators that had readily fed upon, once they started breeding it specifically for a different trait, that they didn't find it palatable anymore, and so they didn't start utilizing it. So there are some, I think, as natives are being more celebrated and planted, I think there's this big push to maybe make them more look commercialized and maybe behave a little bit more confined or look more intentional. I think more research is going into that. Like if we start messing with the certain traits here, what is it gonna do long term? And we just don't know yet. So that would be going back to the white cedar question of, yes, we have a lot of people using them as fencing and in landscapes. Are those being the same as in their native state or not? Not really sure. Lilac and hydrangea, you could probably substitute with, there actually is a native hydrangea in the US. It's more on the East Coast, but the smooth hydrangea, it's called Annabelle. It's actually native on the East Coast. So at least it's US
in the same
based.
continent.
Yep. So, and they're really hardy because of that, and they are really pretty. They've got the really large white green blooms. So that could be an alternative. Another one would be the new American New Jersey tea tree shrub.
Oh, yeah.
That's really, really pretty. There's actually quite a few flowering shrubs that there's a ton of different options out there, and I think they're all very pretty. Not necessarily a problem, but something to consider is it probably doesn't have as long a bloom time as some of these other ones. So, and then maples. I like some maples, but just going back to that diversity, and then of course, probably not autumn blaze or anything that's labeled fast growing. I had someone, was it last year, 2 years ago, that still really specifically wanted amber maple. Like she was desperate to find it, and I kept trying to explain the issues with that, and that is actually on the noxious weed list and whatnot. And she was very upset that it was on there. And so don't plant that one either.
Yeah, and that makes me think of one of the houses I had in college. All of the ornamental shrubs out front were buckthorn. And, you know, if I hadn't just finished my plant taxonomy course, I would have just walked right by and said, "Oh, those are nice berries and nice green foliage," and never thought anything differently of it.
But stay green, nice and late into the season and everything.
And that's how they became an issue, is because they originally were brought in as that windbreak, and they were seen on a lot of farms as property barriers and stuff like that. And we just never know what the next one is. So that is kind of buyers beware, right? Because a lot of our invasive species were brought here intentionally and never really thought about that, what damage it could do. So
yeah, it's a hard one because a lot of them do look nice. I mean, I'm sure all of the invasive species that we have to manage through our work, I think we're all cultivars. There's buckthorn, honeysuckle, purple loosestrife, all of those garden escapees. So aside from adding like the plant component for pollinators, do you ever talk with landowners about other things they can do to their yard to kind of help create more pollinator habitat? Because pollinators need more than just flowers. They need places to nest and hide and whatever else they do.
Yeah, I think as folks are trying to be more aware of their own little ecosystem that they have, or their own landscape, I think people are honestly thinking about that. And I've seen a lot more people wanting to go the route of like, I don't want to do any pesticides or anything like that. But I normally start with that conversation of just first describing the different nesting areas that pollinators do have. I currently rent, and so my landlord is very much like, you should do XYZ as fall care. Like you have to move all the leaves, you have to get rid of the leaves, you have to, he's very much English garden style. And that's not necessarily my style of gardening. But prim and proper, and everything looks nice and neat. And so I had to explain, like, we leave them up and I do cut most of the stems down, but I keep like a foot off, so that if there are any of those stem nesting pollinators, they have a space to be. I was able to at least persuade the leaves to be moved somewhere else on the property, not necessarily removed completely. And then especially when we have our weird timing in the spring, to like last year and a little bit of this year, we had a lot of people that wanted to start doing spring lawn care or spring garden care, like March, even into February, I think last year it was. And just that, like, it's okay to slow down for a little bit. Like, I know we have a limited time that we can be out in the garden. That's nice. But just to explain that they're still waking up, and until they have a certain temperature to get their systems going out of hibernation, that to just slow. Or if you do want to clear it up, just don't throw it away. Just kind of put it off to the side, or have a designated spot where they can wake up on their own. So that's normally where I start, is just to, and I always explain that there's like 2 different ways of doing spring and fall garden care. And that's usually, do I leave it all and just do it in the spring when everything wakes up? Do I do it in the fall? So that's usually where I start.
Yeah, it is. And I've heard from some experts too, even there really isn't a good time to clean up, because there's some life cycle somewhere, always in the duff layer of leaves or in the stems. You never really know when they're going to emerge. So just got to do our best, and like you said, don't make it prim and proper, because you're going to clean up something, whether it's a caterpillar or a stem nesting bee or something.
The one caveat with that is, if you did struggle with some kind of disease that growing season, that is a different process or management. So
that's good to note.
If you are dealing with, especially with like the lilac leaf spot that we were dealing with last year, that would be a case where I would take all of the debris out and do get rid of that, just because you don't want to reinfect for next year. So of course there's disease. If you have disease, that might be a different scenario, but most of the time, just I don't know if this is a bad thing to say about myself, but sometimes I say I'm just a lazy gardener, just because I want to like I like mulching my leaves into the grass, and I like leaving certain things there. And so it's just educating people on why you're making those practices. So
yeah, it's just kind of that cultural shift in perspective of how we maintain our lawns.
Absolutely. So, you talked about educating landowners, and I know you also assist landowners with more of these native planting designs, whether it's a shoreline stabilization or, prairie planting. Kind of get, when we're working with landowners, we get a very similar question of, will this attract bees? And I know, speaking for myself, I hate bees. They scare me, they sting me, it hurts, I don't like it. So how do you typically answer that question? Are we attracting wasps and hornets? Are we attracting bees? Do I need to be worried about this prairie planting if I'm allergic to bees?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I have had quite a few people that come to me and they want to do something different with their lawn care practices. And so usually I'm a huge advocate for fine fescue alternatives in lawns, but also potentially doing a bee lawn, converting into a bee lawn situation. But then people are concerned, right? Like, it's a bee lawn. Am I going to be out barefoot? I'm barefoot all summer. Like, am I going to step on bees? So I know that there is that concern. My concern would be more wasps than bees. Bees have a tendency to not want to sting you. So unless you are directly in their nesting area, or you are disturbing them pretty closely, they're not going to want to sting you, because most of them they have a barb on their stinger. And so if they sting you, they actually end up dying. And so they don't want to have to do that. So I do explain that process a little bit, and that they have certain time periods where they can be a little bit more grumpy, just like our wasps can be a little bit more grumpy in the fall. And so I tell folks, like, it's because they know what's coming. It's winter and their resources are low. And so they're a little bit more aggressive to what they have, and just working around their own life cycle with your expectations. And honestly, I haven't had a lot of people say that that's been an issue of running into like a nest or anything like that. Most folks that want to attract it are going to be okay with that. I think if they are wanting to attract pollinators, they're going to live with what ends up coming with that. Of course, I understand people have allergies. My dad is allergic to bees, but he's a beekeeper. And so, like, you know, I totally understand that concern. Maybe then if you have an area, like say your patio, have a barrier where you aren't planting asters right up by where you have your lawn chair, right? Because then you aren't going to have all the bees right there. So I think there's some design decisions you can make. And then also just being aware of their life cycle goes a long way too.
Yeah. And
I
always
also knowing the difference between a wasp and a hornet and a ground nest, a ground wasp nest compared to more of our native bees that are more solitary.
Yep.
And just the quote unquote risk associated with each species, and planning for that lowest risk species, and understanding that you can't really control where a ground hornet nest is going to be. They don't really use our. Do they use our flowers too much for pollination, or are they mostly carnivores?
Yeah, so I think like our big three naughty ones are like the ground wasps, paper wasps, bald-faced hornets. Those kind of are the ones that are the more aggressive ones. And I think they're going to be taking spots like at the corner of your garage or up in the point of your roof more. That's not going to be necessarily affected by your plantings, because you're right. I believe they're more carnivore based and more of those foraging, either on rotted fruit or they're more decomposers than they are going out and looking for nectar.
So, and more along the lines of, conversations with landowners on maintaining lawns and how that might impact pollinators. You kind of briefly mentioned, some landowners are a little more aware of like maybe not using pesticides in like their lawn care. Does that ever come up, like when folks are asking for advice on how to improve pollinator habitat? Do you bring up like, are you using pesticides? Because that can potentially impact the pollinators that you're actually trying to attract, and ways around that if they're still really interested in maintaining like a more manicured lawn.
Yeah, the perfect lawn. Yeah, I think for the folks that are wanting to go more the native route or pollinator habitat route, I think most of them are already aware of some of the concerns with pest management and using herbicides or pesticides. I think it's the folks that want that perfect lawn. I haven't seen a lot of crossover where they want like the perfect lawn, but I also want all these pollinators.
Right.
I think it's usually educating the ones that I want this perfect lawn, no matter what kind of thing, and educating those folks. And then the folks that come are like, I want to do all the pollinator stuff. Just a reminder of like, even some of the organic stuff doesn't necessarily mean that it is completely safe for pollinators. So I know her name's Vera Kirchek, I believe is her last name. She's been with the university for years, and she has amazing resources on pollinator and pesticide management, doing IPM stuff. And she has, if you just look up Vera Kirchek Laboratories, U of M, she just has hundreds and hundreds of resources based on the interaction with pesticides and pollinators. I think one of the main things that people, if you are going to go the pesticide route, read the label. They're like, look at the active ingredients and look
Don't
up
just read it, follow
it. Yes, read it, look up the active ingredients, see if there is any interaction with pollinators, and then look into the timing if you are going to do it. So there is a bee toxicity list, and some of them will have the caveat of, sure, you can apply this, but if it's in its flowering stage only spray like really early morning or after sunset when the pollinators or other insects aren't present. So I think there are some workarounds, but organic doesn't mean safe.
Yeah.
And then just read and follow the label is your best bet.
Yeah. And one thing I try to remind landowners too is, if you're allowing insects to come into your property, usually there are beneficial insects that will prey on those pest insects that you don't want. So providing that diversity to attract a bunch of different insects in there might do the job that a pesticide would do.
Yep. And some of our like more major pests, like, so I'm from Illinois, so Japanese beetles have been around for a while. So when I moved up here and Japanese beetles are just kind of being more prevalent outside of the metro area, I was like, oh, like it's like educating folks, what they are, and then for taking them for an example, there is no pesticides for them, right? So the best bet you can do is old hand and bucket, soapy bucket water, and having to just hand pick them off. So I think for folks who rely on pesticides and herbicides, they tend to want a fix-all.
Right.
And they're just there isn't a fix-all for all situations. So and there's always going to be risks for certain things. So depending on what you care about, you have to read and follow labels.
Yep. Yep.
It's
Absolutely.
The law.
Absolutely. So we've been talking herbaceous pretty heavily here so far, and since I'm a tree guy, I figure we should probably talk about trees and shrubs a little bit. So can you talk about how trees and shrubs benefit pollinators, and then how, as humans, we talked about maples, we're selecting these autumn blaze maples very commonly, but not only those, we've also selected many male trees for our urban environments because they're clean, they're not messy. And how does that impact both pollinators but also us as human beings?
Yeah. So the first part of that question was, what was the first part of the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Talk about how trees and shrubs benefit pollinators and how humans have selected more male trees for our urban in landscape, and how that impacts both the pollinators and humans. I gave it to y'all again, I guess.
Yep, no worries. So trees are some of them are good sources for pollinators. A lot of people think that and it's true, most trees are pollinated through wind, but some of them do rely on pollination as well, especially our fruit crops. They heavily rely on our pollinators. The second part of that, with how we've gone either selecting for male traits in trees or making them sterile, the main thing I've been seeing is that pollen has just been up the wazoo then because of that. So as we've seen the selection for more male trees, definitely pollen rates have increased. And if anybody has any kind of allergies, you may have noticed that your allergies have just been kind of rough the last couple of years, and that can be an indicator of that. It is kind of interesting because people are like, I don't want a messy tree. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Because I think because some people consider the leaves messy. Like we have honey locusts at my childhood home, and they have those tiny little leaflets that go everywhere. And my dad's like, it's just a messy tree. And I'm like, I don't know what that means because all trees do some kind of thing. But like some people really love crab apples and having the flowering, or people just liking other flowering trees, but they really dislike having the fruit. And I'm like, well, that just kind of goes with what that tree is. So I don't know specifically how that is affecting the pollinators, other than if you are messing with some of the flowering structures of those trees, you could potentially see either the ratio of the pollen and nectar get all wonky. I haven't delved too much into what that looks like on that front, but I would assume that that is messing with the food source in some cases.
Absolutely. And bringing it back to the humans, I tell people if they're looking for a tree that's going to provide shade and not be messy, going to be low maintenance, what they're really asking for is a nice shade umbrella.
Yes,
So
there
keep that
you
over
go.
the patio, and let's keep the trees a little further from the house then, and be a little bit messier.
Yes, that, and I had someone ask recently, he said, I have a bunch of cottonwood trees, and they're one of those also notorious messy trees, that and maples. I don't like all the helicopters that are everywhere. I'm like, okay, or I have acorns everywhere. I'm like, okay. But this guy, he had a bunch of cottonwood trees, and he's like, is there kind of some kind of spray, or like, I just don't want it to have the seeds everywhere. How do I prevent it? I'm like, well, I think that's called a chainsaw, because there is not much you can do with that.
Nope. Oh dear.
Yeah.
That again kind of goes into the, along the line of we need to alter our way of thinking when it comes to landscaping expectations. It's okay to have a little bit of mess, and
Yes.
it's good for the ecosystem. We want the little critters to have places to hide and have food to eat and everything, because they are benefiting us as well. I mean, without pollinators, we wouldn't have fruit and vegetables that we eat every day. So
Yeah.
they need a place to eat as well.
And I had someone, it was interesting conversation too, because I had never really he said there was a tree that was abandoned in like just an off road. It was just there. And he was concerned that nobody was taking care of it or pruning it or something like that. And he's like, I don't think it's been pruned, and ever is it going to be okay? And it was a cute thought. And also I'm like, trees have been here a lot longer than we have.
Yeah.
Usually we prune if there is disease or for like structural issues, but it probably will be okay with that. And he's like, oh, good. I am so glad that you said that, because I do really like this tree, but I don't own it. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
And so kind of speaking of trees, I mean, we talked about pesticides for like herbaceous and on lawns and stuff. And this could be maybe both David and Quincy. Folks are having to treat their trees for various diseases and pests, whether it's like bur oak blight or emerald ash borer. And since we kind of talked about how trees are used by pollinators, is there any risks to pollinators if trees are being injected with pesticide?
I think so. I mean, if we look at emerald ash borer, the treatment, it's more like life support usually. But because it's injected into the tree, you're not only affecting the emerald ash borer larva, but you're affecting all native borers or anything that's within that tree system. So it's an interesting thought, especially as we've looked at the spongy moth treatments that we've had, or there was an interesting case up north where it was because tent caterpillars have a cyclical life cycle. It was a year where they had a really high population, and this resort had voted on treating it and like going and spraying for them. I think a lot of our pesticides, at least in the forestry management, um, they're not very selective within insect species. So like if you are treating for one caterpillar, you are going to be treating all said caterpillars. So it's not a selective treatment.
Right.
I don't know. David, would you say anything else?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, where one insecticide is extremely broad and it's going to kill all of the bad, but it's also going to kill all of the good that are impacting your tree. And then one, especially with emerald ash borer treatments, it's very much so that short-term treatment. Let's get this tree to survive a little bit while you're establishing another tree, so you're not just losing all your shade at once. And with many of our systemic insecticides, It's going throughout the tree. It's going out into the leaves. So any insect that's feeding on or using those leaves, I can't tell you the exact impacts, but there are going to be impacts on those species as well. And then many times when homeowners are, they don't want to pay for someone to treat that tree, so they're doing more of a soil drench around the base of their tree. If they have any sort of flowering species, those plants are also going to be absorbing that neonicotinoid that's extremely harmful to our pollinators. And now you have that both in your tree, which was what you were shooting for, but it's also in all of those plants around there that are that really high pollinator benefit that are being used readily. And we're not even thinking about that because we're so focused on saving the tree, which I'm all for it. But we just have to think about our timing and think about our application of that insecticide so that we're not having those off-target impacts as well.
I would agree, especially with the soil drenches, and that's what I always direct folks to go to professionals. Like, yes, you
Absolutely.
can purchase these insecticides, but if it's an oak tree, because they're so sensitive to a lot of our insecticides and other treatments, but go to the professionals, because even if you spill a little bit, like David said, we have no idea how far those off-target effects are going to be. And I've seen folks where they're trying to do their best to save their tree, and you are also having some off effects too that you just don't think about.
And some of these insecticides they're hard on the tree. It's it's like a human doing a full case of full
It's like chemo
spectrum of antibiotics, and sometimes you feel a little crappy afterwards. And that tree is going to have a stress response as well. So you put that soil dredge down, you don't get the results that you expected. So, well, I'm going to double that dosage and do it earlier than I'm supposed to. And the tree doesn't have that response that you want it to. And now not only have you hurt your tree, but you've also doubled the insecticide, pesticide load that's in your yard. And it's just this kind of cascade of effects that is really not what the landowner is going for, and they're not getting the desired results. And
then nobody's happy.
Exactly. Not even the bees, not the trees, nothing's happy. Awesome. So I know the U of M has really excellent education and outreach programming. So if landowners that have been listening today, they're looking to get more involved or they want to learn more, where would the best place be for them to find upcoming events or recent publications and resources? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so the University of Minnesota Extension website page is kind of the landing page for a lot of this stuff. If you're looking for more local, I do have a newsletter that I just started called Get Growing. So for any of the outreach that I'm doing, I do have a newsletter that I send out monthly. I think it's going to be bi-weekly now during the growing season. But just tips and tricks and resources that would be timely. You can always contact me through emails. The easiest way to get a hold of me, because I have 4 counties, I'm not always attached to my phone. So that's my first name, Quincy, Quincy, at umn.edu. So if you have any questions that are more specific to your site conditions, you can certainly send it my way. And if it's not something I can answer, I have a good team behind me with the university, but also my awesome partners like David and Franny today too.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. And thank you also so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. I mean, you've just shared so much fantastic information with us and everyone that's going to be listening. So for our listeners out there, please stay tuned for more conservation-related podcast episodes. And from the entire SWCD and U of M Extension, happy Pollinator Week. And thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks, Quincy.